All right. We are back, and it's time for an appendix of the Amphiboly of the concepts of reflection owing to the confusion of the empirical with the transcendental use of the understanding. My understanding is an amphiboly is an uncertainty or a confusion, and what Kant is going to be doing here is responding to Leibniz and Leibniz's view of the world, in particular demonstrating how Kant's system that we've already talked about proves that Leibniz's view kind of intellectualizes things in a weird way and doesn't really tell us anything about the world as we experience it. In a nutshell, that's definitely oversimplifying things, obviously, but here we go. Reflection is not concerned with objects themselves in order to obtain concepts from them directly, but is a state of the mind in which we first set ourselves to discover the subjective conditions under which we can arrive at concepts. It is the consciousness of the relation of given representations to the various sources of our knowledge, and by way of such consciousness alone, the relation of these representations to one another can be rightly determined. Okay, so we can determine relational things as concepts, at least. I think the point he's making is kind of without sense experience. We can do that. Before saying any, and I think Leibniz would take that position too, because I think wasn't Leibniz, we talked a little bit about Leibniz, I don't know, fucking 20 episodes ago. But Leibniz took the position that like space was effectively not a predetermined, grid upon which things were populated in, but rather space was created by the relation of 2 points separate from one another, as opposed to those two things being placed in a larger grid that could actually contain nothing. Anywho, before saying any more about our representations, the first question is this: to which faculty of knowledge do they all belong? Is it the understanding or the senses by which they are connected and compared? Many a judgment is accepted from mere habit or made from inclination, and as no reflection precedes or even follows it critically, the judgment is supposed to have its origin in the understanding. I have a feeling Kant's going to take issue with that, because it's probably based on prior experience, even if we think it's just arising from the understanding. Not all judgments require an investigation, that is, a careful attention with regard to the grounds of their truth. For if they are immediately certain, as for instance, that between 2 points there can only be one straight line, then no closer marks of their truth than they themselves convey could be discovered. But all judgments, indeed all comparisons, require reflection, that is, a discrimination of the faculty of knowledge to which any given concepts belong. The act by which I place the comparison of representations in general side by side with the faculty of knowledge in which that comparison is made, and by which I distinguish whether these representations are compared with one another as belonging to the pure understanding or to sensible intuition. I call transcendental reflection. That's what he calls it. Sorry. The relation in which two concepts may stand to each other in one state of mind, two concepts can stand to each other in one state of mind, is that of identity and difference, agreement and opposition, and inner and outer, and finally of the determinable and the determination, matter and form. The correct determination of this relation depends on the answer to the question in which faculty of knowledge they belong of each other subjectively, sensibly, or understanding. For the proper distinction of the two is of great importance with regard to the manner in which the relation must be thought. Before making any objective judgments, we compare the concepts to find in them identity. Okay. Of many representations under one concept, with a view to universal judgments, or difference for producing particular judgments, or agreement and opposition, which turn into affirmative and negative judgments, respectively, etc. Okay. For this reason, it might seem that we ought to call these concepts of comparison. But since the contents of concepts and not their logical form must be considered, that is, whether the things themselves are identical or different, in agreement or opposition, etc., all things can have a twofold relation to our faculty of knowledge, namely, either to sensibility or the understanding. Right. I think what he's saying is like, I can have the concept of a tree and have the concept of two different trees, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's different because it's just a concept. But then if I have the actual experience of two different trees in sensibility, then they are two different trees. Which makes sense. And since the manner in which they belong to one another depends on the position in which they belong, it follows that transcendental reflection, that is, the relating of given representations to one or the other class of knowledge, can alone determine the relation to one another. Okay. Wait, what? Sorry, I'm going to reread that. Where's the beginning of this sentence? All things can have a twofold relation to our faculty of knowledge, namely either the sensibility or to the understanding. And since the manner in which they belong to one another, meaning understanding or understanding or sensibility, depends on the position in which they belong, it follows that transcendental reflection, that is, the relating of given representations to one or the other class of knowledge, can alone determine their relation to one another. Okay, that kind of makes sense. Whether the things are identical or different, in agreement or in opposition, etc., can be established at once from the concepts themselves by means of mere comparison. Right. We can tell if something's the same as a concept by just comparing the two pretty easily. But first of all, by a proper discrimination by means of a transcendental reflection of that class of knowledge to which they belong. It might therefore be said that logical reflection is a mere comparison because it abstracts from the faculty of knowledge to which any given representations belong, and treats them, insofar as they are all found in the mind, as homogeneous. Okay. This is important, because I think... Yeah, let me read that one more time. It might therefore be said that logical reflection is a mere comparison, because it abstracts the faculty of knowledge to which any given representations belong, and treats them, insofar as they are found in the mind, as homogeneous. Okay, and I think that's what he's saying Leibniz is doing for everything. However, transcendental reflection, which deals with the objects themselves, supplies the possibility of an objective comparison of representation among themselves. And it is therefore very different from logical reflection because the faculty of knowledge to which they belong is not the same. Right. And I think Leibniz's position is like, he essentially takes an intellectual approach to determining whether things are separate. And the idea is like, and this is from Professor Gijsbers' lecture, who probably will explain it better, definitely explains it better. But like, I think Leibniz would start from the intellectual standpoint of like, if you have a droplet of water, like two separate droplets of water, as a concept, if they are completely identical and indistinguishable, like it's just H2O, like they are completely indistinguishable, made up the same atoms, like down to the same, to that level, they are completely identical, then they are the same. Like they can't be different since there's nothing distinguishing them. So two droplets of water existing in the world are not different, because otherwise they would be completely replaceable in the world, or could be reversed, and it would not actually matter to the world. And I think Kant is saying, yeah, as a concept that might be true, but that's only in as a concept. Like once we actually go into sensibility, the thing that distinguishes those two things is our perception of them, and we perceive them in two different coordinates, those two droplets of water, and that is the distinguishing factor. So even though they are chemically the same, they are actually distinguishable in a very real, sensible, spatial sense. And I think that's what Kant's getting at here. This transcendental reflection is a duty from which no one who wishes to form a priori judgments about things can escape. We shall now take it in hand, and may thus hope to throw not just a little light on how to determine the real business of the understanding. Okay, paragraph 1. Identity and difference. When an object is presented to us several times, but each time with the same inner determinations, I think that's kind of what I was talking about, H2O, qualitas et quantitas, it is, as long as it is considered an object of the pure understanding, always one and the same object, which makes sense, as a concept, and is only one thing, not many. But if the object is appearance, then a comparison of the concepts is of no consequence. Meaning if they're exactly the same, it's of no consequence. They can be exactly the same, but in different locations. And though everything may be identical with regard to the concepts, yet the difference of place of these appearances at the same time is sufficient ground for admitting the numerical difference of the object. Eureka! See? Parentheses, of the senses. Thus, though there may be no inner difference whatever, either in quality or quantity, between two drops of water, see? Oh man, it feels good to know what you're talking about sometime. Yet the fact that they may be seen at the same time in different places is sufficient to establish their numerical difference. Leibniz took appearances to be things in themselves, and so to be intelligibilia, that is, objects of the pure understanding. Hold on. I was literally, I have a book. It's, I think it's a Hackett book. Yeah, it is. Leibniz Philosophical Essays. I started to read it, and it was really stupid of me, but I was just like, I wish there was just a book. Like Leibniz just wrote a book with his philosophy in it, as opposed to there's a bunch of essays, and some of it was on random stuff, and I was like, I don't know. I didn't read it. Is the short answer to that, because I'm an idiot. But so I'm a little out over my skis talking about Leibniz here, but we're gonna make it through it. Okay, Leibniz took appearances to be things in themselves, and so to be intelligibilia, that is, objects of the pure understanding. Ow. Though on account of the confused nature of their representations, he assigned to them the name of phenomena. And from this point of view, his principle of the indiscernible could not be contested. Okay. As, however, appearances are objects of sensibility, and as the use of the understanding with regard to them is not pure but only empirical, so their plurality and numerical difference are indicated by space itself, as the condition of outer appearances, For one part of space, though it may be perfectly similar and equal to another, is still outside of it, and is, for this very reason, a part of space different from the first, which, added to it, makes a larger space. And this applies to all things which exist at the same time in different positions of space, however similar or equal they may be in other respects. Okay. I'm not sure I totally understand Leibniz's point, but I should probably read Leibniz to figure that out, mostly. Okay, so, paragraph 2, agreement and opposition. When reality is represented only by the pure understanding, then no opposition can be conceived between realities. That is, no relation such that when combined in one subject, they should annihilate the consequences of each other, just as 3 minus 3 equals 0. I think I understand what he's saying. Like, kind of like, if you're talking about reality as like a concept of the understanding, or a product of pure understanding only, then, you know, anything can be true. It's only when you get to the sensible when you might actually learn that your understanding doesn't necessarily comport with reality. I think that's what he's saying. The real in appearance, on the contrary, skipping over the Latin word there, not sure what it is, may very well be in opposition, and when such realities are combined in one subject, one can annihilate completely or in part the consequence of the other, as in the case of two forces moving in the same straight line, each attracting or impelling a point in opposite directions, or in the case of pleasure counterbalancing a certain amount of pain. Okay. 3. The inner and the outer. In an object of the pure understanding, only that is inner which has no relation whatever, as regards its existence, to anything different from itself. The inner relations, on the contrary, of substantia phenomena, I think meaning things in a world, in space, are nothing but relations, as the substance itself is a sum of mere relations. Okay, hold on. I need to reread that. I think I understand. I think we're saying, like, the objects of the understanding, like inner objects, as we understand them, like, don't have any difference necessarily. But, let me just reread it. In an object of the pure understanding, only that is inner which has no relation whatever, as regard its existence, to anything different from itself. The inner relations, on the contrary, of substantia phenomena in space are nothing but relations, and the substance itself is a sum total of mere relations. We only know substance in space through the forces that are active in a space, by either drawing others to it, attraction, or by preventing others from penetrating into it, repulsion and impenetrability. Okay. Other properties constituting the concept of a substance that appears in space, and which we call matter, are unknown to us. As an object of the pure understanding, on the contrary, every substance must have inner determinations and forces bearing on its inner reality. But what other inner accidents can I think of except those in which my own inner sense presents to me, namely, something which is either itself a thinking or analogous to it. How the fuck is he talking about? What? He's lost me. Okay, as an object of the pure understanding, on the contrary, every substance must have inner determinations and forces bearing on its inner reality. I think he's talking about like knowing a thing in and of itself. So it must have some inner reality that actually constitutes it Whereas appearance is like, well, who the hell knows? But what other inner accidents can I think of except those which my own inner sense presents to me? Right? But how can I know that? Because all I know is what I know from senses. Something other, which is either itself a thinking, I don't know what he means there, or analogous to it. Hence Leibniz regarded all substances, because he conceived them as noumena, and even the component parts of matter, after having in his thought removed from them everything implying outer relation and therefore also composition, as simple subject endowed with powers of representation, in a word, as monads. Okay, and so like noumena, he's saying like so he's saying that Leibniz regarded all substances because he conceived of them as noumena, meaning things outside the bounds of sensibility. Like a thing in itself, for example. And even the component parts of matter, after having in his thought removed from them everything implying outer relation, and therefore also composition, as simple subjects endowed with powers of representation, in a word, as monads. Okay. Not sure I completely understand, but I'm going to move on. Matter and form, or paragraph 4, matter and form. These are two concepts which are treated as the foundation of all other reflection. So inseparably are they connected with every use of the understanding. Matter and form. The former, meaning matter, denotes the determinable in general. The latter, its determination, both in a purely transcendental meaning of these terms, all differences in that which is given, and the mode in which it is determined being abstracted from. Logicians formerly called the universal the matter, and the specific difference the form. In every judgment, the given concepts may be called the logical matter. Concepts are the logical matter for a judgment, and their relation, by means of the copula, the form of the judgment. Okay. So the relations of objects are logical matter, and the relation, and their relation to each other forms larger judgments. Okay. In every being, its component parts are the matter. The mode in which they are connected in it is the essential form. With respect to things in general, unlimited reality was regarded With respect to things in general, unlimited reality was regarded as the matter of all possibility, and the limitation thereof, negation, as the form by which one thing is distinguished from another according to transcendental concepts. The understanding demands first that something should be given, okay, at least in concept, in order to be able afterwards to determine it in a certain manner. In the concept of the pure understanding, therefore, matter comes before form. Makes sense? And Leibniz, in consequence, first assumed things, monads, and within them a power of representation, in order afterwards to found thereon their outer relation, and the community of their states, namely of their representations. In this way, space and time, with the former through the relation of substances, the latter through the connection and determinations among themselves, were possible grounds and consequences. Okay, I'm not really following. I'm going to keep going just to see if I can pull it together. And so it would be indeed if the pure understanding could be referred immediately to objects, and if space and time were determinations of things in themselves. Okay. But if they are only sensible intuitions, in which determine all objects merely as appearances, then it follows that the form of intuition, as subjective quality of sensibility, comes before all matter. Okay, but if they are only sensible intuitions, right, meaning things we sense, in which we determine all objects merely as appearances, we don't know things in themselves, then it follows that the form of intuition, as the subjective quality of sensibility, comes before all matter. Okay, that makes sense. Sensations. That hence space and time precede all appearances and all data of experience, and that this form of intuition in fact renders all experience first of all possible. Transcendental aesthetic. As an intellectualist philosopher, Leibniz could not tolerate that the form should come before things themselves and determine their possibility. Okay, a perfectly just criticism once he assumed that we intuit things as they are, only though only in a confused representation. Okay, so because Leibniz thinks we intuit things as they are, things in themselves, then effectively the things in themselves, because they're presented to us, and presumably based on his view of the understanding, they could be kind of presented to us sufficiently outside of space and time, like intellectually, and therefore in Leibniz's view, space and time don't precede material things, which is completely the antithesis of Kant, which who thinks that space and time obviously are the form, the a priori forms of our intuition, and then it's populated with things that we experience as appearances through our intuition, but not necessarily as things in themselves. Okay, that's as good as I'm gonna get, I think, at this point. But since sensible intuition is a special subjective condition which lies a priori at the foundation of all perception, and the form of its original, therefore the form is given by itself, and matter, or the things in themselves which appear, is far from providing the true foundation, as we would have to judge if we followed mere concepts. On the contrary, the very possibility of matter presupposes a formal intuition. Space and time is given. Okay. Sure. Okay, and then it's a new section called Note on the Amphiboly of the Concepts of Reflection. I beg to be allowed to call the position which we assign to a concept, either in sensibility or in the pure understanding, its transcendental place. I'll allow it. Thus the determination of this position, which belongs to every concept according to the difference of the use we make of it, and the directions, according to rules, for determining that place for all concepts would be called the transcendental topic. Okay? Sure. This doctrine, by always distinguishing to which faculty of knowledge each concept truly belongs. Okay. Hold on. I'm going to start over, sorry. Beg to be allowed to call the position which we assign to a concept. So we're talking about concepts here, either in sensibility or the pure understanding, its transcendental place. So that's what Kant is talking about, concepts that could potentially be the same. They have their transcendental place. I have to take a break. apparently there are skunks near the house. My wife wants me to run outside, I guess. Like, I don't know what the fuck I guess I'm going to go get sprayed by a skunk. I don't know. Alright, I was not sprayed by a skunk. It does smell like skunks in our house. We've had skunks living under our house for like, I don't know, like 2 years now. They come and go. Like, sometimes we don't smell them for like a couple months. But yeah, didn't see any this time. Okay. Note on the amphiboly of the concepts of reflection. I beg to be allowed to call the position which we assign to a concept, either in sensibility or in the pure understanding, its transcendental place. Okay. So in that situation, if we have two concepts which are the same, or like two concepts of separate things, they would have their transcendental place. Okay, that makes sense to me. Because I think what he's setting up is like, I think that's what I wasn't getting. I think the transcendental topic is maybe going to be, well, let's just see. Thus, the determination of this position, which belongs to every concept according to the difference of use we make of it, and the directions according to the rules for determining that topic for all concepts, will be called the transcendental topic. Okay. So like how we use it, like what it means, relations to other things, that's a transcendental topic. This doctrine, by always distinguishing to which faculty of knowledge each concept truly belongs, would thoroughly protect us against the surreptitious claims of pure understanding and the delusions arising therefrom. Every concept, or every heading under which many items of knowledge belong, may be called a logical place. Upon this is based the logical topic of Aristotle, of which orators and schoolmasters could make use in order to find under certain headings of thought what would be best suit the matter at hand, and thus to be able, with a certain appearance of thoroughness, to be pseudo-rational or to prattle on verbosely. The transcendental topic, on the contrary, contains no more than the above-mentioned four headings of all comparison and distinction. They differ from the categories. Okay, so the transcendental topic contains the categories up there. Four headings, so we just talked about. They differ from the categories because they do not serve to present the object according to what constitutes its concept, magnitude, reality, but present in all its manifoldness only the comparison of representations which precedes the concept of things. This comparison, however, requires first a reflection, that is, a determination of the place to which the representation of things to be compared belong, namely whether they are thought by the pure understanding or given in appearance by sensibility. Okay? And this is kind of the distinction that Kant likes, but Leibniz doesn't really seem to use, based on my zero understanding of Leibniz. Concepts can be logically compared without our asking any questions as to where their objects belong. That makes sense. That is, as to whether they belong as noumena to the understanding or as phenomena to the sensibility. But if with these concepts we wish to proceed to objects, a transcendental reflection is necessary, first of all, in order to determine for which faculty of knowledge they are to be objects, whether for the pure understanding or for sensibility. Without this reflection, our use of these concepts would be very uncertain, and alleged synthetic principles would spring up, which critical reason cannot acknowledge, or which are simply founded on a transcendental amphiboly, uncertainty, that is, on our confounding of an object of the pure understanding with an appearance. Okay, that makes sense. So we don't want to confuse, we want to understand if we're talking about appearances, like sensibility, or just concepts through the pure understanding, so we need to establish that when we're talking about things, comparing things, trying to figure things out. As kind of a baseline. Because if we're comparing like concepts to sensibility, it's like not possible. For want of such a transcendental topic, and deceived by the amphiboly of the concepts of reflection, The celebrated Leibniz, so he doesn't have the transcendental topic, and he's deceived by the concepts of reflection, meaning he's, okay. The celebrated Leibniz erected an intellectual system of the world, meaning he didn't distinguish between what Kant's talking about, things in a pure understanding and things in sensibility. So he had a purely intellectual system of the world, probably where he got these things confused a lot, or conflated them, or maybe just ignored sensibility, at least as appearance, and considered it as a thing in itself. Which I guess he would say the pure understanding can logic through and understand. Or at least he believed that he knew the inner nature of things by comparing all objects only with the understanding and with the abstract formal concepts of his thought. Our table of concepts of reflection gives us the unexpected advantage of being able to exhibit clearly the distinctive features of this peculiar way of thinking, which rested on a simple misunderstanding. He compared all things with one another only by means of concepts, and naturally found no other differences among them but those by which the understanding distinguishes its pure concepts from one another. The conditions of sensible intuition, which carry with them their own differences, are not considered by him as original, for sensibility was for him only a confused mode of representation. That's right. And not a separate source of representations. According to him, appearance was the representation of the thing in itself, though different in its logical form from knowledge through the understanding, because the appearance because the appearance, with its usual absence of analysis, brings a certain admixture of collateral representations into the concept of the thing which the understanding is able to separate from it. In a word, Leibniz intellectualized appearances just as Locke, according to his system of noogony, 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 if I may use such an expression, you may, centralized all concepts of the understanding, that is, presented them as nothing but empirical or abstracted concepts of reflection. Instead of seeking in the understanding and in sensibility two totally different sources of representations, which can, however, supply objectively valid judgments about things only in conjunction with one another, Kant's position, each of these great men accepted but one of the two, namely, they accepted only the one which, in their opinion, referred immediately to things in themselves, while the other source did nothing but confuse or order the representations of the first. Leibniz, accordingly, compared the objects of the senses, taken as things in general, with one another only in the understanding. Compared objects of the senses, taken as things in general, only with the understanding. He did this, firstly, insofar as they are judged by the understanding to be either identical or different, as he considered only their concepts and not their position and intuition, in which alone objects can be given, and took no account of the transcendental place of these objects, whether the object is to be counted among appearances or among things in themselves. It could not happen otherwise than that he should extend his principle of indiscernibles, which is only valid for concept of things in general, also to objects of the senses. That makes sense. Okay. Otherwise, that he should extend his principle of indiscernibles, which is only valid for concepts of things in general, also to objects of the senses, and imagine that he was thus adding a considerable expansion to our knowledge of nature. No doubt, if I know a drop of water as a thing in itself, in all its inner determinations, then I cannot allow that one drop is different from the other, if the whole concept of the drop is identical with the drop. But if the drop of water is appearance in space, then it has its place not merely in the understanding among concepts, but in a sensible outer intuition in space. And in this case, the physical place is quite indifferent to the inner determinations of things. Yeah. So that a place equals B can receive a thing which is perfectly similar or equal to another in place equals A, just as well as if it were internally ever so different. Difference of place by itself, without any further conditions, renders the plurality and distinction of objects as appearances not only possible, but also necessary. The above so-called law, therefore, is no law of nature. It is only an analytic rule, or comparison of things through mere concepts. Okay. Secondly, the principle that realities, as mere assertions, never logically oppose one another is a perfectly true proposition with regard to the relation of concepts, right? But it has no meaning whatever, either as regards nature or as regards anything in itself, of which we can have no concept. Right. So, like, concepts aren't necessarily contradictory. Like, I should say they aren't necessarily impossible in any sense, because you're just dealing with them conceptually. You could have contradictions, I suppose, and things that don't logically make sense, but as concepts, like, they could be possible. But once you actually have, like, try to find them in the real world or apply them in the real world, that's when you run into issues. The real opposition takes place when A minus B equals 0. Is that a 0? Or an O? That is, wherever one reality is combined with another in the same subject, and one cancels out the effect of the other. This is constantly brought before our eyes in nature, by all impediments and reactions, which, as depending on forces, must be called relates phenomena. General mechanics can even give us the empirical condition of this opposition in an a priori rule, by attending to the opposition of directions, a condition of which the transcendental concept of reality knows nothing. Although Herr von Leibniz himself did not announce this proposition with all the pomp of a new principle, he yet made use of it for new assertions, and his followers expressly inserted it in their system of the Leibniz-Wolfian philosophy. According to this principle, all evils, for example, are nothing but the consequences of the limitation of created beings. That is, they are negations, because these alone can be in opposition with reality, which is perfectly true in the mere concept of a thing in general, but not in things as appearances. Okay, evil? What? According to this principle, all evils, for example, are nothing but the consequences of the limitations of created beings. That is, they are negations, because those alone can be in opposition with reality, which is perfectly true in the mere concept of a thing in general, but not in things as appearances. In like manner, the followers of Leibniz consider it not only possible, but even natural to unite all reality without fear of opposition in one being. For the only opposition they know... Oh, I understand what he's saying. For the only opposition they know is that of contradiction, by which so anything can be possible, really. Because you're just dealing with things that are intellectual, so you can kind of fucking go ham. Okay. For the only opposition they know is that of contradiction, by which the concept of a thing is itself removed. While they ignore that of reciprocal action and reaction, when one real cause removes the effect of another, an opposition which we can only represent to ourselves when the conditions are given in sensibility. Okay. Thirdly, the Leibnizian monadology has no other foundation than the fact that this philosopher represented the distinction of the inner and the outer merely in relation to the understanding. Substances must have something inner, which is free from all outer relations and therefore also from composition. The simple, therefore, is the foundation of what is inner in things in themselves. The simple, therefore, is the foundation of what is inner in themselves. Inner in things in themselves. That which is inner in the state of substances, however, cannot consist in place, shape, contact, or motion. Okay, because those are outer things. Okay. All these determinations, kind of sounds like Locke a little bit. All these determinations, like primary and secondary stuff, all these determinations being outer relations, and we cannot therefore ascribe to substances any other inner state but that through which we ourselves internally determine our sense, namely the state of representations. In such a way the monads were completed. They were to form the basic substance of the whole universe, but their active force consists only in representations, whereby they are, strictly speaking, efficacious merely within themselves. Okay? For this reason, the principle of the possible community of substances among one another could only be a pre-established harmony, and not a physical influence. Could only be a pre-established harmony, and not a physical influence. For as everything is actively occupied only internally, that is, with its own representations, the state of representations in one substance could not be in effective connection with that of another. For as everything is actively occupied only internally, that is, with its own representations, the state of representations in one substance cannot be in effective connection with that of another. Okay, it kind of makes sense. Rather, there had to be a third cause, exercising its influence on all substances and making their states correspond to one another, not indeed by an occasional assistance given in each particular case, but through the unity of the idea of a cause valid for all substances, in which idea they must one and all receive their existence and permanence, and therefore also their reciprocal correspondence among one another according to general laws. Okay. Fourthly, Leibniz's celebrated doctrine of space and time, in which he intellectualized these forms of sensibility, arose entirely from the same delusion of transcendental reflection. If by means of mere understanding I want to represent the outer relations of things, I can do this only by means of the concept of their reciprocal action. And if I want to connect one state with another state of the same thing, this is possible only in the order of grounds and consequences. Thus it happened that Leibniz conceived space as a certain order in the community of substances, and time as a dynamical sequence of their states. That which space and time seem to possess as proper to themselves and independent of things, he ascribed to the confusion. Space and time seem to present as proper to themselves and independent of things, he ascribed to the confusion of these concepts, which led to the fact that that what is mere form of dynamical relations was mistaken for a particular self-subsistent intuition, antecedent to the things in themselves. Thus, space and time became for him in the intelligible form of the connection of things, substances and their states, in themselves, and things were intelligible substances. Thus, space and time for him Thus space and time became for him the intelligible form of the connection of things, substances and their states, in themselves, and things were intelligible substances. Nevertheless, he tried to make these concepts valid for appearances, because he would not concede to sensibility any independent kind of intuition of its own, but ascribed all, even the empirical representation of objects, to the understanding, leaving to the senses nothing but the contemptible task of confusing and mutilating representations of the understanding. Bastard. But even if we could say something synthetically through the pure understanding about things in themselves, which, however, is simply impossible, then this could still never be referred to appearances, because these do not represent things in themselves. In such a case, therefore, we should have to compare our concepts in a transcendental reflection only under the conditions of sensibility, and thus space and time would never be determinations of things in themselves, but of appearances. What things may be in themselves we do not know, nor need we care to know, because after all, a thing can never come before me otherwise than as an appearance. The remaining concepts of reflection have to be treated in the same manner. Matter is substantia phenomenon. What may belong to it internally, I seek in all parts of space occupied by it, and in all effects produced by it, all of which, however, can only ever be appearances of outer senses. I have therefore nothing that is absolutely, but only something that is comparatively internal, and this consists itself of outer relations. Okay? That which, according to the pure understanding, should be the absolutely internal of matter, is a mere phantom. For matter is never an object of the pure understanding, while the transcendental object, which may be the ground of the appearance that we call matter, is a mere something of which we could not even understand what it is, even though somebody should tell us. We cannot understand anything except that which carries with it in intuition something corresponding to our words. If the complaint that we have no insight whatever into the inner of things means that we do not comprehend by means of the pure understanding what the things which appear to us may be in themselves, then it seems totally unjust and unreasonable, for it wants that we should be able to know and therefore to intuit things without senses, that is, that we should possess a faculty of knowledge totally different from the human one, not only in degree, but even in kind, and in its intuition, in fact, that we should not be human, but be beings of whom we ourselves could not say whether they are even possible, much less what they would be like. Observation and analysis of appearances enter into the inner realm of nature, and no one can say how far this may go in time. Those transcendental questions, however, which go beyond the nature would nevertheless remain unanswerable, even if the whole of nature were revealed to us. For it is not given to us to observe even our own mind with any intuition, but that of our inner sense. In it lies the mystery of its origin of our sensibility. The relation of sensibility to an object and the transcendental ground of that unity are no doubt far too deeply hidden for us, who can know even ourselves only by means of inner sense, that is, as appearance. And we shall never be able to use the same imperfect instrument of our investigation in order to find anything but appearances, over and over again, eager as we are to seek the nonsensible cause of these appearances. Yeah, he's probably right. What renders this critique of conclusions drawn by means of mere acts of reflection extremely useful is that it shows distinctly it shows distinctly the nullity of all conclusion with regards to objects compared with one another solely in the understanding, and that it confirms at the same time that we have so strongly what we have so strongly insisted on, namely that appearances, though they cannot be included as things in themselves among the objects of the pure understanding, are nevertheless the only objects in relation to which our knowledge can possess objective reality, that is, where intuition corresponds to concepts. Yeah. If we reflect merely logically, we only compare concepts among themselves in our understanding, trying to find out whether both have exactly the same contents, whether they contradict each other or not, whether something is contained in a concept or is added to it, and which of the two is given, and which may only be a mode of thinking the given one. But if I apply these concepts to an object in general, in a transcendental sense, without determining whether it is an object of sensible or intellectual intuition, then certain limitations appear at once, warning us not to go outside this concept, which upset all empirical use of these concepts, and which thus prove that the representation of an object as a thing in general is not only insufficient, but when taken without sensible determination and independently of any empirical conditions, self-contradictory. I think is what we've kind of talked about a few times. Like, sure, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff with concepts in the understanding, but when the rubber meets the road, it doesn't really work that way. They prove, therefore, that it is necessary either to abstract from any and every object, as we do in logic, or if we admit an object, to think it under the conditions of sensible intuition. And so they provide that the intelligible would require a quite peculiar intuition which we do not possess, and that without it, the intelligible would be nothing for us, while on the contrary, appearances could never be things in themselves. Okay, for if I think to myself merely things in general, the difference of outer relations cannot, it is true, constitute a difference of things themselves, but rather presupposes it. And if the concept of one thing does not differ at all internally from that of another, then I am only positing one and the same thing in different relations, right, conceptually. Furthermore, by adding a mere affirmation, reality, to another, the positive in it is indeed augmented, and nothing is removed or cancelled out, so that we see that the real in things in general can never be in opposition with itself, etc. Alright, new section, which is divided with stars. A certain misunderstanding of these concepts of reflection has, as we have shown, exercised so great an influence on the use of the understanding as to mislead even one of the most acute philosophers to the adoption of a supported system of intellectual knowledge, which undertakes to determine its objects without the intervention of the senses. For this reason, the exposition of the cause that deceives us in the amphiboly of these concepts, as the origin of false principles, is of great utility in determining and securing the true limits of the understanding. Okay? It is no doubt true that what generally belongs to or contradicts a concept also belongs to or contradicts every particular which is contained under it. But it would be wrong to change this logical principle so as to make it say, whatever is not contained in a general concept is also not contained in the particular concepts standing under it. Yeah, okay. For these are particular concepts for the very reason that they contain more than is thought in the general concept. Nevertheless, the whole intellectual system of Leibniz is built upon this latter principle. And so his system and this principle collapse at the same time, together with all ambiguity in the use of the understanding that had its origin in it. So I gotta read that again. Okay. It would be wrong to change this logical... Okay, we got to start with the beginning. It is no doubt true that what generally belongs to or contradicts a concept... So what generally belongs to or contradicts a concept also belongs to or contradicts every particular which is contained under it. Meaning things that actually fall under that concept as well. And the second proposition is, but it would be wrong to change this logical principle so as to make it say, whatever is not contained in a general concept is also not contained in the particular concepts standing under it. Right. So if you have like a general idea of like a tree, like a red tree being a subcategory would not necessarily be precluded by that general concept of a tree, because it adds something to it as opposed to, saying something different from it necessarily. For these are particular concepts for the very reason that they contain more than is thought in the general concept. But what I don't understand is how is it that Leibniz built his entire intellectual system on this? So Leibniz... So the first one is... Concept also belongs, it contradicts every particular... But it would be wrong to change it. Whatever is not contained in the general concept is also not contained in the particular concepts standing under it. For these are particular concepts for the very reason that they contain more than is thought in the general concept. And I guess, a pretty straightforward way, but maybe incorrect way of applying this to Leibniz would be like, since he kind of doesn't buy into the sensibility aspect of a concept, he would just provide general concepts of pretty much everything, right? Meaning, like, you could take the position that, like, a specific example of a tree, you have the general concept of a tree, right? And it is a lot of different things, and frankly is kind of squishy and whatever. But then when you have a particular sensible tree, he would take the position that it is not contained in the general concept of the tree, because it's the senses are kind of irrelevant. They're just gobbledygook. Okay. Nevertheless, the whole intellectual system of Leibniz is built upon this latter principle, and so his system and this principle collapse at the same time, together with all ambiguity and the use of the understanding that had its origin in it. Leibniz's principle of indiscernibles is really based on the presupposition that if a certain distinction is not to be found in the concept of a thing in general, then it could also not be met within the things themselves, and that therefore all things that are not already distinguished from one another in their concepts as to quality or quantity are perfectly the same. Yeah, we kind of talked about this with the water droplets. And because the mere concept of any one thing we abstract, turn the page, from some necessary conditions of its intuition, it is rashly concluded that what one has here abstracted from cannot really be found anywhere at all, and nothing is allowed to a thing except that which is contained in its concept. Okay. The concept of a cubic foot of space, wherever and however many times I may think of it, is in itself perfectly the same, but 2 cubic feet are nevertheless distinguished in space by their places alone, and these places are conditions of the intuition in which the object of our concept is given, and which, though they do not belong to the concept, belong nevertheless to the whole of sensibility. In a similar manner, there is no conflict in the concept of a thing unless something negative is combined with something affirmative. And merely affirmative concepts, if combined, cannot neutralize one another. But in sensible intuition, where we have to deal with reality, for instance motion, we find conditions, opposite directions, from which we were abstracting in the concept of motion in general, and which render possible an opposition, not, however, a logical one. And from mere positives produce a zero. 0 equals 0. And it would be wrong to say that all reality must be in perfect agreement because there is no opposition between its concepts. According to mere concepts, the inner is the substratum of all relational or outer determinations. If therefore I abstract from all conditions of intuition and confine myself solely to the concept of a thing in general, then I can abstract from all outer relations. If therefore I abstract from all conditions of intuition and confine myself solely to the concept of a thing in general, then I can abstract from all outer relations. Yes, and yet there must remain the concept of something which signifies no relation, but only inner determination. From this, it might seem to follow that there exists in everything, substance, something which is absolutely internal, preceding all outer determinations inasmuch as the first renders them possible. Hence it might also seem that this substratum, as no longer containing any outer relations, must therefore be simple, for corporeal things are always only relations, at least of their parts external to one another. And as we know of no entirely inner determinations beyond those given through our inner sense, it seems that this substratum is not only simple, but likewise, according to the analogy of our inner sense, determined through representations, so that all things would be really monads, or simple beings, endowed with representations. All of this would be perfectly true were it not beyond the concept of a thing in general, something more is required for the condition under which alone objects of outer intuition can be given to us, conditions from which the pure concept abstracts. But we see on the contrary that a permanent appearance in space, impenetrable extension, can contain only relations without anything that is absolutely internal. Okay. Right. There's no internal of space, it's just, okay. And yet, be the first substratum of all outer perception. Interesting. It is true that by mere concepts we cannot think something outer without something inner, because concepts of relation presuppose things which are absolutely given and are impossible without them. But as in intuition, something is contained which does not lie at all in the mere concept of a thing in general, and as it is, which supplies the substratum that could never be known through mere concepts, namely a space, which, with all that is contained in it, consists of nothing but formal, or, it may be, also real relations. I am not allowed to say that because no thing can be represented through mere concepts without something absolutely inner. Right. That's interesting to use space as an example here. It doesn't really work. There could not be in the things themselves that are contained under these concepts and in their intuition anything outer without a foundation of something absolutely internal. For if we abstract from all conditions of intuition, then no doubt nothing remains in the mere concept but the inner in general. No doubt nothing remains for the mere concept but the inner in general, with its own internal relations, through which alone the outer is possible. This necessity, however, which is grounded solely on abstraction, does not apply to things insofar as they are given in intuition with determinations that express mere relations, without having for their foundation anything inner. Yeah, that makes sense. It's fucking confusing. Really, I think it makes sense. Whatever we may know of matter is nothing but relations. Whatever we may know of matter is nothing but relations. What we call inner determinations, excuse me, are but comparatively internal. Yeah, but there are among these relations some which are independent and permanent, and through which a determinate object is given to us. The fact that when abstracting from these relations, I have nothing left to think, does not remove the concept of a thing as appearance, nor the concept of an object in abstracto. But it does remove any possibility of an object determinable through mere concepts, that is, of a noumenon. It is no doubt startling to hear that a thing should consist entirely of relations, but such a thing as we speak of is mere appearance and can never be thought of through pure categories. This thing itself consists in the mere relation of some thing in general to our senses. In the same manner, it is impossible for us to represent the relation of things in abstracto as long as we deal with mere concepts in any other way than that one concept which should be the cause of determinations in the other. For this is the very concept of our understanding. For this is the very concept our understanding has with regard to relations. But as in the case we make abstraction from all intuition, we lose a whole manner in which the manifold components can determine the place for one another, that is, the form of sensibility, space, though in truth it precedes all empirical causality. If by merely I'm just going to keep reading. I'm kind of getting this, but I'm not sure I could explain it. So I'm just going to keep reading. If by merely intelligible objects we understand those things that are thought through pure categories without any schema of sensibility, then such objects are simply impossible. If by merely intelligible objects we understand those things that are thought through pure categories without any schema of sensibility, then such objects are simply impossible. The condition of the objective use of all concepts of our understanding is simply the kind of sensible intuition that we have, through which objects are given to us. And if we abstract from this intuition, those concepts have no relation whatever to any object. Indeed, even if we admitted a kind of intuition different from the sensible one, our functions of thought would have no meaning with regard to it. If, on the contrary, we only mean objects of a non-sensible intuition, noumena, I'm saying noumena, he didn't say noumena, to which our categories do not apply, and of which we can have no knowledge whatever, neither intuition nor concept, then there is no reason why noumena, in this merely negative meaning, should not be admitted. But we can't know anything about it, so who gives a shit? For in this case we mean nothing more than this, that our kind of intuition does not embrace all things, but only objects of our senses. That, consequently, its objective validity is limited, and room is left for some other kind of intuition, and so also for things as objects of it. But in that case, the concept of noumenon is problematic. That is, it is then the representation of a thing of which we can neither say that it is possible nor that it is impossible, for we know of no other kind of intuition but our sensible one, or of any kind of concept but our categories. Of our categories. Yet neither of them is applicable to any extrasensible object. We cannot therefore extend in a positive way the field of the objects of our thought beyond the conditions of our sensibility, or assume that besides appearances there exist also objects of pure thought. that is, noumena, simply because these objects do not possess any positive meaning that could be pointed out, because we can't sense them. I'm saying that, he's not. For we must admit that the categories by themselves are not yet sufficient for a knowledge of things in themselves. And he talked about that, I think, the previous section. And that without data of sensibility, they would be nothing but subjective forms of unity, of the understanding, and be without an object. We do not say that thought is in itself a product of the senses and therefore limited by them, but it does not follow that therefore thought without the aid of sensibility has its own pure use, since it would then be without an object. Nor would it be right to call the noumenon such an object of the pure understanding, for the noumenon signifies a problematic concept of an object for an intuition and an understanding totally different from our own of an object. Therefore, that is itself a problem. Hence the concept of the noumenon is not the concept of an object, but only a problem, inseparable from the limitation of our sensibility as to whether there may not be objects entirely independent of the intuition of this sensibility. This makes a lot of sense to me. Got kind of in the weeds there, and I got a little lost, but this makes sense. At least insofar as it relates to noumenon. This is a question that can only be answered in an uncertain way by saying that since sensible intuition does not embrace all things without distinction, there remains a place open for other and different objects, which therefore cannot be absolutely denied. But they also cannot be asserted as objects of our understanding, because there is no determinate concept for them. That's a pretty good summary. Let me highlight that. Kind of stopped highlighting because I was just highlighting everything and kind of lost. The understanding accordingly limits sensibility, but without expanding thereby its own sphere. By warning sensibility that it must never claim to apply to things in themselves, but only to appearances, it forms the thought of an object in itself, but only as a transcendental object. This object is the cause of appearance, therefore not itself appearance, and cannot be thought as magnitude or as reality or as substance, etc., because these concepts require sensible forms in which to determine an object. Right, because we need the senses in order to do this stuff, we can't just say that it is these things by itself. It's like early stuff in the critique. Of this object, therefore, it must always remain unknown whether it is to be found only within us or also without us, and whether, if sensibility were removed, it would vanish or remain. Yeah. If we wish to call this object noumenon, because the representation of it is not sensible, then we are at liberty to do so, but as we cannot apply to it any of the concepts of our understanding, such representation remains empty for us, serving no purpose other than that of indicating the limits of our possible knowledge and of leaving at the same time an open space which we can fill neither through possible experience nor through the pure understanding. Amen. The critique of this pure understanding does not therefore allow us to create a new sphere of objects beyond those which can come before it as appearances, or to stray into intelligible worlds, or even into the concept of such. The mistake which leads to this is the most in the most plausible manner, and which, though excusable, can never be justified, consists in making the use of the understanding, contrary to its very intention, transcendental. And thus objects, that is, possible intuitions, are made to conform to concepts, not concepts to possible intuitions. Yeah, okay. As that on which alone their objective validity can rest. The cause of this mistake, in turn, is that apperception, and with it thought, precede every possible determinate arrangement of representations. Consequently, we think something in general and determine it, on the one hand, sensibly, and yet distinguish the universal object represented in abstracto from this particular mode of sensible intuition. Thus there remains to us a mode of determining the object merely through thought, and although this mode of determining is a mere logical form without any content, yet it seems to us to be a mode in which the object exists in itself, noumenon, without regard to the intuition which is restricted to our senses. Okay, Kant adds another table here, and it's kind of a short thing, and I think this is the actual end of the transcendental analytic before we get into the transcendental dialectic. It's kind of a weird thing that's just a page and a half that's put in here, but I'm going to read it now, and then the next episode I'll just read start with the transcendental dialectic, which is called which is on 285. Before leaving this transcendental analytic, we have to add something which, though in itself of no particular importance, may yet seem to be requisite for the completeness of the system. It's got to be important then, right? The highest concept from which all transcendental philosophy usually begins is the division into the possible and the impossible. But as all division presupposes a divided concept, a higher concept is required, and this is the concept of an object in general, taken as problematic, it being left undecided whether it be something or nothing. As the categories are only concepts which refer to objects in general, the distinction whether an object is something or nothing must proceed according to the order and direction of the categories. As the categories are the only concepts which refer to objects in general, the distinction whether an object is something or nothing must proceed according to the order and direction. Okay, that makes sense. Of the categories. 1. Opposed to the concepts of all, many, and one, there is the concept which cancels everything, that is, none, and thus the object of a concept to which no intuition can be found to correspond is equals nothing. That is, it is a concept without an object. Yeah, I actually read a whole book on zero, and it was pretty interesting. As are the noumena, which I think is what he's talking about, which cannot be counted among the possibilities, though they are not therefore claimed to be impossible either, or as certain fundamental forces which have newly been thought, and thought indeed without contradiction, are nonetheless thought independently of any example from experience, and must not therefore be counted among the possibilities. 2. Reality is something, negation is nothing. Namely, it is the concept of the absence of an object, such as shadow or cold. Is cold the absence of hot? I don't know. Who knows? 3. The mere form of intuition without substance, is in itself no object, but merely the formal condition of an object, as appearance, such as pure space and pure time. These, though they are something, as forms of intuition, are not themselves objects which are intuited. 4. The object of a concept, which contradicts itself, is nothing, because the concept is nothing. It is impossible, such as a two-sided rectilinear figure. A table showing the division of the concept of nothing, the corresponding division of the concept of something, follows automatically, and would therefore have to be arranged as follows. Nothing as 1. Empty concept without an object. 2. Empty object of a concept. 3. Empty intuition without an object. 4. Empty object without a concept. We see that the Ons Ratianus, number 1, is distinguished from the Nihil Negativum, number 4, in that the former, the number 1, empty concept without an object, cannot be counted among the possibilities, right? While the result of mere fancy, although not self-contradictory, where the latter, empty object without a concept, is opposed to possibility, in that the concept cancels itself. Both, however, are empty concepts. The nihil privativum, number 2, and number 3, I'm not going to read the Latin, are on the contrary empty data for concepts. It would be impossible to represent to ourselves darkness unless light had been given to the senses, or space unless extended things had been perceived. Negation as well as the mere form of intuition are, without something real, no objects. Okay, that was, that was pretty rough, I'll be honest with you. There was a lot of times there where I was struggling, and I think it's probably because I don't know Leibniz that well, or really at all. I've gotten some secondhand explanations and read some secondhand stuff about Leibniz, but yeah, I don't think I know it well enough to really meaningfully grasp some of the minutia there. So anyway, but that was fun. My head hurts and I'm tired, and it's 10:51. And I'm going to go to bed. But, yeah, next is the Transcendental Dialectic. And I think I keep doing this, but Professor Gijsbers lectures, or we're at like lecture 45, I think, out of 60. So we've done 45 lectures through the first 284 pages, and then there's 15 lectures for the last, I don't know, almost 400 pages. So I'm thinking, I'm going to have some free reign here, hopefully, to do some longer form, like some longer reading sessions where I can knock out 20, 30, 40 pages at a time. But yeah, we'll see.